the vast silence of the Arizona desert, where stars outnumber souls, Thomas Nighthawk tended his fire alone. At 62, the Apache elder had grown accustomed to solitude, finding peace in the ancient rhythms of desert life and the simple pleasure of roasting corn over open flames. His weathered hands, marked by decades of labor and loss, moved with practiced precision. The nearby mesa cast long shadows as the sun retreated, painting the landscape in amber hues that matched the embers beneath his cooking grate. But this night would be different. 3 sets of headlights appeared on the distant dirt road, bringing with them women whose lives were as fractured as the desert clay. Could a man who had chosen isolation find healing in unexpected company? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas reached for the small leather pouch that hung from a wooden peg near his door. The medicine bundle, passed down from his grandfather, contained sacred items he rarely consulted: eagle feather, white sage, tobacco, and a smooth river stone that had witnessed more years than any living Apache. Tonight, something pulled him toward it. Dawn typically found Thomas awake before the sun. 62 years had not slowed his rising, though the desert cold penetrated his bones more deeply each winter. His one-room dwelling sat nestled against red rock formations that provided natural shelter from harsh winds. Inside, practicality ruled. A wood stove, handcrafted pine table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed with a colorful woven blanket, and shelves lined with books, herbs, and essentials. 20 years had passed since he'd chosen this solitary existence. After Nancy died, cancer took her in 6 brutal months. Their son Michael lasted just 3 years before a drunk driver stole him too. At 39, Thomas had lost everything that anchored him to the world of people. The tribal council offered support. Distant cousins suggested he move in with family, but grief had hollowed him into someone who could no longer navigate the complicated dance of human connection. He retreated to his grandfather's land, 12 miles from the reservation proper, where he built his dwelling with his own hands and the help of only 2 old friends who respected his need for silence. They stopped visiting after the first year. Thomas's daily rituals sustained him. He rose with the sun, meditated facing east, foraged desert plants, tended his small garden, carved wood during the hottest hours, and walked the perimeter of his territory as evening approached. Twice monthly, he drove his aging pickup to the trading post for supplies, exchanging minimal words with people who had learned not to expect conversation. He became known among the tribe as a skilled healer who would leave remedies on doorsteps if someone left a note at the trading post describing their ailment. Children whispered that he was a medicine man with supernatural powers. Adults knew he was simply a man who had chosen to live by the old ways after modern life had taken everything from him. The desert became his companion. Lizards sunning themselves on his porch acknowledged him with blinking eyes. A family of coyotes passed through seasonally, keeping respectful distance. Hawks circled overhead, sometimes dropping feathers that Thomas collected and placed with reverence in an old cigar box. He knew every plant, rock formation, and seasonal change within walking distance of his home. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of night when even desert creatures fell silent, Thomas would step outside and speak aloud to Nancy and Michael, telling them about his day as if they had just stepped away momentarily. Those were the only times he used his voice for more than practical necessities. Today had been unremarkable until sunset. He'd repaired a leak in his roof, harvested early corn from his garden, and carved another piece of the chess set he'd been working on for months with no particular recipient in mind. As twilight approached, he'd settled before his outdoor fire pit, placing ears of corn on the iron grate that had belonged to his father. The first distant rumble registered as thunder until he realized the sound came from the east, along the dirt road that connected his property to the main highway. Visitors were rare, perhaps twice yearly when tribal elders checked on him or when a ranger patrolled the broader territory. Thomas stood, squinting into the dimming light. Not one vehicle but 3, their headlights bouncing wildly across the uneven terrain. He considered retreating inside, pretending absence, but something in his chest, intuition his grandfather would have called the knowing, told him to stay. He untied the medicine bundle with careful fingers, removing the small river stone and clasping it in his palm. The stone had traveled with 4 generations of Nighthawk men through wars, displacements, marriages, births, and deaths. Its smooth surface, worn by water centuries before human hands touched it, had absorbed prayers, tears, and silent pleas. Thomas closed his eyes, seeking guidance. When he opened them again, the vehicles were close enough to distinguish. 2 sedans and a small SUV, all at least a decade old and carrying the dust of long travel. The first car pulled to a stop 30 feet from where he stood. The headlights cut off, plunging the scene into the blue-gray light of desert dusk. A woman emerged, then a child, then more from the other vehicles. Thomas slipped the stone into his pocket and straightened his shoulders. Thomas stood motionless as the visitors emerged fully from their vehicles. In the fading light, he counted 6 figures, 3 women and 3 children. One of the women approached while the others hung back, a protective hand on each child's shoulder. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said. Her voice carried the slight lilt of a Spanish accent beneath carefully practiced English. "We saw your fire from the road. Our GPS led us down this way, but I think we're lost. And now Carmen's car is making a terrible sound." She gestured toward the oldest sedan. Thomas nodded once, his voice rusty from disuse. "You're about 17 miles off the highway." The woman sighed, pushing back dark hair streaked with early silver. "I'm Maria Velasquez. That's Lily with her daughter Emma." She pointed to a slender blonde woman standing beside a girl of about 10 with matching fair hair. "And that's Denise with her son Jacob." The third woman, tall with deep brown skin and close-cropped hair, gave a cautious wave. Thomas reluctantly reached for the worn leather book he kept beneath a stone on the rough-hewn bench beside his fire. The visitor's log contained only 23 entries spanning 2 decades. "You can sign here," he said, offering a pencil stub. "Tribal police sometimes check who passes through." Maria took the book, signed her name, and passed it to the others. Thomas returned to tending his corn, hoping they would simply ask for directions and leave. But the hood of the oldest car was now open, Denise leaning over the engine with a phone flashlight. "Cooling system's shot," she announced. "We need water and probably a new hose." The smallest child, Jacob, had wandered toward Thomas's fire, eyes wide with fascination. "Is that corn cooking?" he asked, his voice small against the vastness of the desert night. Thomas nodded. "I've never seen corn cooked like that before," the boy continued. "It's how my people have done it for generations," Thomas said, surprising himself with the offered information. The boy's mother approached, gently pulling him back. "I'm sorry. He's curious about everything." Thomas turned the corn on the grate. "It's fine." Lily joined them, her daughter half hidden behind her. "We're trying to reach Phoenix," she explained. "We've been driving since dawn from New Mexico." The sky had deepened to indigo, stars emerging in brilliant clusters. Desert nights turned cold quickly, and Thomas noticed the children weren't dressed warmly enough. He sighed inwardly, recognizing the inevitable conclusion. "You won't make it to a garage tonight," he said. "Not without a tow, and that'll cost you more than the car's worth out here." Silence fell as the women exchanged glances. Maria finally spoke. "Is there somewhere nearby we could stay? A motel or—" Thomas shook his head. "Trading post is closed. Nothing else for 40 miles. He felt their collective uncertainty. 3 women with children, stranded in unfamiliar territory with a stranger. He'd spent 20 years cultivating aloneness, and now 6 people stood in his sanctuary, disrupting patterns set in stone. Yet something older than his grief spoke to him, the desert code of survival that demanded assistance to travelers, a code his grandfather had impressed upon him since childhood. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. "I'll look at the car in the morning." Relief visibly washed over them. Denise looked skeptical. "We don't want to impose." "It's already done," Thomas interrupted. "There's nowhere else." He gestured toward his dwelling. "It's small. The children can take the bed. I have mats for the rest." As if suddenly remembering his cooking, Thomas removed the corn from the grate. "You should eat something." While the visitors retrieved essential bags from their vehicles, Thomas entered his home and opened the trunk at the foot of his bed for the first time in years. Inside lay extra bedding, carefully preserved, Nancy's doing. She had always prepared for guests who rarely came. Maria's daughter Sophia, a solemn girl of about 12, helped Thomas lay out sleeping mats. She worked in silence that matched his own, and he found her presence less intrusive than he'd expected. Denise brought in a cooler from her SUV. "We have sandwiches and some fruit to contribute," she offered. Thomas nodded his acceptance and continued preparing his sparse home for more people than it had held in decades. He removed several items from hooks on the walls, a dream catcher Nancy had made, Michael's first successful bow, a family photograph, and tucked them carefully into a drawer. Some things were still too private to share with strangers. Outside, the desert night deepened around them. Indifferent to the small human drama unfolding beneath the stars, Thomas hesitated before the cabinet that housed his grandmother's clay cookware. The pieces, a large serving bowl painted with traditional patterns, for smaller bowls and 2 platters, had remained untouched since his last family meal. With careful hands, he removed them, wiping away dust with a clean cloth. Outside, he added wood to the fire pit and positioned a metal tripod over the flames. From this he hung a cast-iron pot filled with water, beans, and dried chilies. To the women's sandwiches and fruit, he added his roasted corn and the stew that would soon be ready. The children watched with fascination as he worked. Emma, Lily's daughter, peppered him with questions that he answered with single words or nods. Jacob remained shy but observant. Sophia, Maria's daughter, sat slightly apart, her eyes constantly returning to the darkness beyond the fire's light. "You've lived here a long time?" Denise asked, attempting conversation. 20 years, Thomas replied. "Alone all that time?" Lily's question came softly. Thomas nodded, stirring the pot. "I couldn't imagine," Maria said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that sounded judgmental. I just meant." "No need to explain," Thomas said. "Most people feel that way." When the stew was ready, Thomas served it in the clay bowls, offering the first to the children. The unexpected sweetness of seeing food in the old family dishes created a tightness in his chest that he concealed by busying himself with practicalities. They ate in a circle around the fire, desert darkness pressing in around their small island of light. After initial awkwardness, conversation emerged in fits and starts. Thomas learned they had met at a support group in Albuquerque. "Women starting over," Lily explained with a self-conscious smile. "We each had different reasons for needing to start over," Denise added. "But we connected immediately." "And now you're traveling together," Thomas observed. "Strength in numbers," Maria said, her tone suggesting more than casual cooperation. As the meal progressed, Sophia remained vigilant, startling at small sounds from the desert night. When a coyote called in the distance, she dropped her spoon with a clatter. "It's just a coyote," Thomas told her gently. "They don't come near fire." "She's been jumpy since we left," Maria explained, an undercurrent of worry in her voice. She hesitated, then added, "Her father wasn't happy about us leaving." Something in her phrasing alerted Thomas. He'd heard similar careful wording from women who had sought shelter at the tribal center over the years. "The coyotes hunt in pairs this season," he said, changing the subject for Sophia's benefit. "The female leads, male follows. They've been hunting these lands since before people walked here." This sparked the children's interest, and Thomas found himself sharing desert knowledge, how to spot owl nests in saguaro cacti, which plants stored drinking water, what the different night sounds meant. Even Sophia's vigilance eased as she listened. Lily watched Thomas with the children, her expression thoughtful. When their eyes met briefly across the fire, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of shared experience with loss. After the meal, Thomas showed them how to identify major constellations. The stars are never clearer than in the desert, he explained. Too much light everywhere else. We've been driving through cities for days, Denise said. Jacob, have you ever seen this many stars? The boy shook his head, wonder on his face. It's like they're almost touching us. The Apache believe the stars are ancestors watching over us, Thomas said, surprising himself again with the personal disclosure. As the night deepened and temperatures dropped, they moved inside. Thomas stoked the wood stove while the women helped children prepare for bed. He noticed Denise discreetly giving medicine to Jacob and recognized the distinctive orange bottle of prescription medication. The sleeping arrangements required careful navigation of his small space. The three children took the bed, while the women and Thomas arranged sleeping mats on the floor. Thomas positioned himself nearest the door, an old habit from younger days. As silence settled over the crowded room, Thomas lay awake, acutely aware of the soft breathing of strangers in his sanctuary. 20 years of solitude hung suspended, temporarily displaced by these unexpected visitors. The weight of their unknown stories pressed against the walls of his carefully constructed isolation. Outside, the desert continued its night symphony of wind, distant animal calls, and the ancient whisper of sand shifting grain by grain across the timeless landscape. Sleep eluded Thomas. The unfamiliar sounds of others breathing in his space kept him hovering in semi-wakefulness. Near midnight, he rose silently and stepped outside, careful not to disturb his guests. The desert night embraced him with familiar coolness and silence. He had just settled on his porch bench when the door creaked softly behind him. Lily stood in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket he'd provided. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep either." Thomas nodded toward the empty space beside him. She hesitated, then joined him, keeping a respectful distance. "It's so quiet out here," she said. "I forgot what real quiet sounds like." They sat in silence for several minutes, gazing at the star-filled sky. Thomas found her presence less intrusive than he'd expected. "Thank you," Lily said eventually, "for taking us in. I know it must be disruptive." "Desert rule," Thomas replied. "No one turns away travelers in need." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. "They sound like they're talking to each other," Lily observed. "They are," Thomas said. "Mated pair. Been in this territory about 3 years now." Lily pulled the blanket tighter. "You notice everything out here, don't you?" "Not much else to do." A comfortable silence settled between them before Lily spoke again. "Emma's father died 2 years ago. Cancer." She said it matter-of-factly, without preamble. "He was sick for 14 months before the end." Thomas nodded, understanding the need to speak painful truths to the night sky rather than face-to-face. "I was a music teacher," she continued. "Had to stop working to care for him. Then afterward I just couldn't go back. Couldn't face the same classrooms, same colleagues with their sympathy." She shook her head. "That sounds ungrateful, doesn't it?" "No," Thomas said simply. Lily glanced at him. "Have you lost someone too? I'm sorry if that's too personal." Thomas remained silent so long that Lily began to apologize, but he finally spoke. "Wife, cancer. Then son 3 years later. Car accident." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Thomas looked up at the stars. "Long time ago now. Does it get easier?" The question held a fragile hope. "Different," Thomas replied. "Not easier." just different. On impulse, Thomas rose and went inside, returning with an object Lily couldn't make out in the darkness. He set it on the small table between them and wound a metal key. The soft scratch of a phonograph needle touched vinyl, and gentle music drifted into the desert night. A woman singing a folk song, her voice slightly distorted by age and technology. "My wife's," Thomas explained. "Nancy collected records." "It's beautiful," Lily said, closing her eyes to listen. "Haven't played them since she died," Thomas admitted. "Seemed wrong somehow. And now," Thomas considered this. "Tonight it seemed wrong not to." They listened to the entire song without speaking. When it ended, Thomas didn't wind the phonograph again, and the night silence returned. "Emma wants to learn guitar," Lily said eventually. "I keep promising to find her lessons once we settle somewhere. I used to play, but—" She trailed off. "But music reminds you of before," Thomas finished for her. "Yes." She looked at him with surprise. "Exactly that." "I understand," he said simply. Lily studied him in the moonlight. "I think you do." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and they both tracked its brief, brilliant path. "Make a wish," Lily said automatically, then smiled self-consciously. "Sorry. Teacher habit with children." "What would you wish for?" Thomas asked, surprising himself with the question. Lily considered this seriously. "Peace, I think. Not just absence of noise or trouble, but real peace. Inside." She gestured vaguely toward her chest. "What about you?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. 20 years of carefully maintained solitude had reduced his wants to simple things: good weather, successful gardens, absence of pain in his aging joints. The question of wishes seemed to belong to another life. "Don't know any more," he admitted finally. "Maybe that's something to think about," Lily suggested gently. The eastern horizon showed the first hint of lightning. Dawn would arrive soon. "We should try to sleep," Thomas said, rising. Lily nodded and stood. "Thank you for the music and the conversation." As they moved toward the door, Lily stumbled slightly on an uneven board. Thomas instinctively reached out to steady her, his hand briefly touching her arm. The simple human contact, his first and longer than he could remember, sent an unexpected warmth through him that lingered even after they had returned to their separate sleeping areas. Thomas woke before sunrise, as was his custom. He moved silently through the room, navigating around his sleeping guests with practiced ease born from decades of hunting. Outside, he performed his morning meditation facing east, waiting for the first sliver of sun to appear over the distant mountains. By the time he returned, Denise was awake, concern etched on her face as she felt her son's forehead. "He's warm," she whispered when she noticed Thomas. "He gets fevers sometimes. I have medicine, but—" She rummaged through a bag, producing an empty prescription bottle. "We were supposed to refill this in Phoenix." Thomas approached and looked at Jacob. The boy's face was flushed, his breathing slightly labored. "May I?" he asked, hands hovering over the child. Denise hesitated, then nodded. Thomas gently placed his palm on Jacob's forehead, then checked his pulse at the wrist and neck. "Not dangerous yet," he determined, "but needs attention." He moved to a wooden chest in the corner and retrieved a worn leather-bound book, his sketchbook of medicinal plants. Thumbing through pages of detailed drawings annotated with notes in both English and Apache, he found what he sought. "I'll be back shortly," he told Denise and stepped outside. The desert dawn revealed itself in layers of color, deep purple giving way to magenta, orange, and finally the clear blue of morning. Thomas moved with purpose, gathering specific plants he documented in his book: desert willow bark, creosote leaves, and the root of a particular cactus. He returned within 30 minutes. Inside, everyone was now awake. Maria and Sophia prepared a simple breakfast while Lily and Emma tried entertaining Jacob, who looked miserable wrapped in a blanket despite the warming day. Thomas set to work at his small kitchen table, grinding the plants with a stone mortar and pestle, adding water heated on the wood stove. Denise watched skeptically. "I appreciate the effort," she said quietly, "but Jacob has an autoimmune condition. He needs actual medicine." "This is medicine," Thomas replied without looking up. "Different kind." He completed his preparation and approached Jacob with a cup of steaming liquid that smelled strongly of earth and herbs. "It tastes bad," he warned the boy honestly, "but it will help." Jacob looked to his mother, who hesitated again before nodding her permission. "All of it," Thomas instructed as Jacob made a face at the first sip. While Jacob struggled with the medicine, Thomas began to examine the contents of his refrigerator, a luxury he'd allowed himself 5 years ago when solar panels became affordable enough to power small appliances. Sophia appeared at his elbow. "I can help cook," she offered quietly. Thomas nodded and handed her several eggs. "These need to be used." Together they prepared breakfast, eggs, the last of Thomas's cornbread, and coffee for the adults. Thomas noticed Sophia's practiced movements in the kitchen. "You cook at home?" he asked. "Sometimes," she replied. "When Mom works late or when—" She stopped abruptly. Thomas didn't press. Instead, he showed her how to flip the eggs using only the pan's motion rather than a spatula, a small skill that brought a brief smile to her serious face. After breakfast, Thomas examined the disabled car. The diagnosis was as Denise had suspected, a cracked radiator hose and coolant leak. "Parts store is 40 miles away," he told them. "I can call from the landline at the trading post, but delivery will take at least a day." This news was met with concerned looks among the women. "We can't impose on you another night," Maria said. Thomas shrugged. "Same problem as yesterday. Nowhere else to go." Denise approached, Jacob looking visibly better at her side. "Your medicine seems to be helping," she admitted. "What was in it?" Thomas showed her his sketchbook, pointing to the plants he'd used and their properties. Her professional skepticism wavered as she examined his detailed notes. "You documented all these yourself?" she asked, leafing through pages of precisely rendered plants with medicinal notes. "Over many years," Thomas confirmed. "I'm a nurse," she explained, "or was before Jacob got sick. Had to switch to part-time administrative work for the flexible hours." Thomas nodded understanding. "The medicine will need another dose at midday." While the others rested and the children explored the immediate surroundings under Maria's watchful eye, Thomas walked to his truck. The old pickup started reluctantly, and he drove the 5 miles to the trading post. Sam, the Hopi man who ran the place, raised eyebrows at Thomas's request to use the phone and order car parts. "Got company?" he asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Stranded travelers," Thomas replied shortly. "'Bout time you had some company out there," Sam commented. "Been too long alone, Thomas." Thomas ignored this and made his call, arranging for parts to be delivered the following afternoon. As he turned to leave, Sam called after him. "Supposed to rain tonight. First monsoon storm of the season." Thomas nodded thanks for the warning. The summer monsoons transformed the desert, bringing flash floods and renewal. He would need to prepare if they were staying another night. By midday, the desert heat had intensified. The women retreated to the relative coolness of Thomas's dwelling while the children grew restless, confined by warnings not to wander. "I could show them some of the safe areas," Thomas offered unexpectedly, "before it gets too hot." The mothers exchanged glances. "That would be wonderful," Lily said. "Emma's been dying to explore." "Just stay within sight of the house," Denise cautioned, her gaze lingering on Jacob, who looked much improved after Thomas's medicine. Thomas nodded and turned to the children. "Hats," he instructed, "and water." Before leaving, he retrieved a handcrafted bow and a quiver of arrows from a high shelf. The items were smaller than standard size, made for younger hands. Sophia noticed his momentary hesitation as he touched them. Outside, Thomas led the children to a shaded area beneath a rocky overhang. He showed them how to identify animal tracks in the sandy soil. "Rabbit passed here this morning," he explained, pointing to distinctive prints. "And here, coyote following after." "Did the coyote catch the rabbit?" Jacob asked with concern. "No," Thomas said. "See how the rabbit tracks go into those rocks? Good hiding place." Emma spotted a lizard basking on a sun-warmed stone. "What kind is that?" "Desert spiny," Thomas answered. "They change color with the temperature. Darker when cool, lighter when hot." Sophia, who had remained quiet, suddenly pointed to a plant. "Is that one medicine too?" Thomas nodded, impressed by her observation. "Good eye. That's creosote. Helps with pain and infection." He led them a little farther, to where the landscape opened into a small clearing. Here he unwrapped the bow and arrows. "These were my sons," he said simply. "He was about your age when I made them for him." The children grew solemn at this revelation. "Where is your son now?" Emma asked innocently. "Emma," Sophia whispered sharply, understanding instinctively what the adults had already surmised. "It's all right," Thomas assured them. "My son died many years ago. Car accident." "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. Thomas acknowledged this with a nod, then changed the subject. "Would you like to learn how to use these?" The mood lightened as Thomas showed them how to hold the bow, nock an arrow, and aim at a makeshift target, a dried cactus pad propped against a rock. His instructions were patient and precise. "In Apache tradition, children learn to hunt early," he explained. "Not just for food, but to understand the balance of all living things." "Did you hunt when you were our age?" Jacob asked. "Yes, with my father and grandfather." "Was it scary?" Emma wondered. Thomas considered this. "Respectful," he corrected. "We never took more than needed. Always gave thanks to the animal spirits." Sophia tried the bow next, her serious face focused in concentration. Her arrow flew surprisingly true, grazing the edge of the target. "You have a natural gift," Thomas told her, and was rewarded with a rare smile. As they practiced, Thomas shared stories of Apache traditions, how his people had survived in these lands for centuries, their relationship with the desert, and the importance of respecting all elements of nature. "The Apache believe everything has a spirit," he explained. "The rocks, the plants, the animals, even the wind." "Even the cactus?" Jacob asked, pointing to a towering saguaro. "Especially the cactus," Thomas confirmed. "They live longer than people, some for 200 years. They've seen more than any of us." Emma had wandered a few steps away and suddenly called out, "Look what I found!" The others joined her where she crouched over something half buried in the sand. Thomas knelt beside her, carefully brushing away grit to reveal a piece of pottery, a fragment of a bowl decorated with faded geometric patterns. "Apache?" Sophia asked. Thomas examined it closely. "Older, probably Hohokam. They lived here 1,000 years ago." "1,000 years!" Jacob exclaimed. Thomas nodded. "This desert holds many stories." He allowed Emma to keep the pottery shard after explaining its significance and the importance of respecting such finds. As they headed back toward the house, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. "Storm coming," Thomas observed. "Monsoon season is beginning." Sophia glanced at him with concern. "Is that bad?" "It's the desert's renewal," Thomas explained. "Rain brings life, but it can be dangerous too. Flash floods come quickly." As they approached the house, Thomas noticed Lily watching from the porch. Something in her expression, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, caused an unfamiliar warmth to spread through his chest. The children ran ahead, eager to show their mothers the pottery shard and recount their archery lessons. Thomas followed more slowly, the the small bow and quiver in his hands feeling simultaneously lighter and more significant than they had in years. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly as Thomas worked outside, securing loose items before the approaching storm. Maria appeared beside him, offering to help prepare lunch while the others rested indoors. "Sophia had fun this morning," she said as they gathered ingredients. "She doesn't smile much these days." Thomas nodded but didn't pry. They worked side by side in comfortable silence until Maria spoke again. "I should explain why we're really traveling." She twisted a gold band on her finger, damaged, with a bent prong where a stone had once been set. "We're not just going to Phoenix for a visit." Thomas continued slicing vegetables, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "My husband, Ricardo," Maria began, her voice steady but quiet. "He's a respected businessman in our community. Everyone thinks he's charming." Her knife paused over a tomato. "No one sees what happens at home." Thomas kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. "It started small, controlling what I wore, who I spoke to. Then criticism, constant criticism. Then the shoving began." Maria resumed cutting with mechanical precision. "The first time he hit me, he cried afterward, promised it would never happen again. I believed him." She absent-mindedly touched her cheekbone, where the faintest yellowing of an old bruise remained visible beneath her makeup. "Sophia saw the last time. That's when I knew we had to leave. No child should see their mother." She trailed off. "No," Thomas agreed quietly. "They shouldn't." Maria twisted the damaged ring. "I still wear this. Stupid, isn't it? Part of me is still afraid to take it off. Like he'll somehow know and it will make things worse when he finds us." "He's looking for you," Thomas stated rather than asked. She nodded. "He has friends in the police department. Money, connections. That's why we're avoiding main highways, staying off the grid." "Where will you go after Phoenix?" "My cousin in California. She's expecting us." Thomas considered this information. Desert crossing is dangerous, especially with children. "We don't have much choice," Maria said. "Ricardo has people watching the airports, bus stations." Thomas pointed to her ring. "May I?" Hesitantly, Maria removed the damaged band and placed it in his palm. The gold was high quality but misshapen, the setting empty where a diamond had once been. "In Apache tradition," Thomas said, "objects can carry negative spirits, hold bad medicine." "You think the ring is bad luck?" "I think," Thomas said carefully, "that carrying pieces of a broken past makes the journey forward heavier." Maria considered this. "What would your tradition suggest doing with it?" "Transformation," Thomas replied. "Turn what was harmful into something that protects." He placed the ring on his workbench. "I could reshape it, make something new." "Your choice." Maria stared at the ring for a long moment. "I'd like that." As they finished preparing lunch, Sophia joined them, hovering protectively near her mother. The girl's watchful eyes reminded Thomas of young deer, alert to danger, ready to flee at the first sign of threat. "Sophia," Thomas addressed her directly, "would you help me carry these plates?" The girl nodded, accepting the responsibility with solemn dignity. "Your mother tells me you're good at keeping secrets," Thomas continued conversationally. Sophia's eyes darted to her mother, who gave a reassuring nod. "I am," Sophia confirmed. "That's an important skill," Thomas acknowledged. "But do you know what's even more important?" Sophia shook her head. "Knowing which secrets to keep, and which ones need to be shared with people who can help." The girl considered this new concept carefully. "Sometimes," Thomas continued, "keeping secrets about scary things makes the scary things stronger, like feeding them." Maria watched this exchange with glistening eyes. "Is that true?" Sophia asked her mother. "Yes, Mija," Maria confirmed softly. "It is." As they brought lunch to the table, The first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the desert. The others joined them, and conversation shifted to the approaching storm and preparations needed. Later, as the women helped the children gather stones to secure the edges of tarps over vulnerable areas, Thomas took a moment alone with Maria. "The road to California through the desert," he said. "There are people who help. Safe houses." He wrote something on a scrap of paper. "Show this when you need shelter. Apache symbol for protection." Maria studied the simple geometric design. "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Thomas looked toward Sophia, who was carefully selecting the perfect stones with Emma and Jacob. "Children shouldn't see their mothers afraid," he said simply. "And women shouldn't live in fear." Maria tucked the paper carefully into her pocket. "Thank you." As if sensing the weight of the moment had passed, Thomas nodded toward the western sky, now dark with approaching clouds. "Storms coming faster than I thought. We should finish preparations." While the others secured the outdoor areas, Denise retrieved several heavy textbooks from her car. She placed them on Thomas's table, checking that they hadn't been damaged by travel. The spines bore titles on constitutional law, civil procedure, and indigenous rights. "Law school textbooks," Thomas observed, running a weathered finger along one cover. "I'm studying for the Arizona bar exam," Denise explained. "I was licensed in New Mexico, but let it lapse when Jacob got sick." Thomas nodded. "You're starting over too." "Trying to," Denise said with a sigh. 5 years away from practice feels like 50 in legal terms. Everything changes. Precedents, procedures. She settled at the table with a notebook. "I thought I'd use this time to study, if that's all right." Thomas gestured his permission and began preparing the wood stove for the cooler weather the storm would bring. "Your medicine helped Jacob," Denise acknowledged after a few minutes of silence. "I've tried everything Western medicine offers. Some helps, some doesn't. Nothing's worked as quickly as your herbs did." "Different knowledge," Thomas replied. "Not better or worse, just different." Denise studied him. "Were you trained formally?" "In herbal medicine. My grandfather taught me. He was a healer." Thomas added wood to the stove. "Then I studied nursing briefly at community college." This surprised her. "You're a nurse." "Never finished," Thomas clarified. "After Nancy got sick, I needed to work full-time." Denise's expression softened. "So you understand the medical world." "Enough to know its limits," Thomas said, "and its strengths." The conversation lapsed as Denise returned to her studies and Thomas continued his preparations. Outside, the sky darkened further, and the wind picked up, carrying the distinct petrichor scent of approaching rain. An hour later, Jacob entered, bored with being confined indoors. He approached his mother's textbooks with curiosity. "Can I read too?" he asked. Denise smiled fondly. "These might be a bit much for you, buddy." "I brought my own book," Jacob said, producing a worn paperback about dinosaurs. As Jacob settled beside his mother, Thomas noticed the easy comfort between them, a relationship built on mutual adaptation to challenging circumstances. "Have you always wanted to be a lawyer?" Thomas asked Denise. "Since I was 12, she confirmed. "My father was falsely accused of theft. The public defender didn't care, but then a law clinic took his case." Her expression brightened with the memory. "They proved his innocence. I decided that day I wanted to do the same for others." "And you did, for a while." Legal aid attorney in Albuquerque, helping low-income clients. Pride flickered across her face. Then Jacob was born, and 2 years later he was diagnosed. She ruffled her son's hair affectionately. Priorities shifted. "Mom quit her job to take care of me," Jacob stated matter-of-factly, not looking up from his book. "Now she works at the doctor's office doing paperwork." "Medical billing," Denise clarified. "Not what I trained for, but it has flexible hours and good insurance." Thomas considered this. And now Arizona? A fresh start, Denise said. And specialized treatment options for Jacob in Phoenix. The first heavy raindrops hit the roof, and Jacob looked up with excitement. Is that the storm? Thomas nodded. Just beginning. As if contradicting him, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the windows, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Jacob jumped, and Denise instinctively put an arm around him. Desert storms come fast, Thomas explained. Not like in the city. The rain intensified rapidly, drumming on the roof with growing fury. The others hurried inside, laughing and shaking off water. It's really coming down, Emma exclaimed, her hair dripping. Thomas checked that everyone was accounted for, then secured the door against the wind. The single room felt suddenly smaller with all 7 of them inside, seeking occupation during the forced confinement. In Apache tradition, Thomas said, particularly to the children, the first monsoon storm brings renewal, washes away the old season. Like baptism? Lily asked. Thomas considered this. Similar idea. Cleansing. New beginning. Denise looked skeptical. Pretty metaphors don't change practical realities. Don't they? Thomas challenged mildly. Stories shape how we see our lives. Stories don't pay bills or cure illness, Denise countered. The tension in the small space thickened. Maria and Lily exchanged glances, while the children sensed the adult discord and grew quieter. Both can be true, Thomas said finally. Practical action and meaningful story. Denise seemed about to argue further when another lightning strike hit close by, momentarily cutting the solar-powered lights. In the brief darkness, Jacob reached for Thomas rather than his mother, a small hand finding Thomas's arm with instinctive trust. When the lights returned, Denise noticed this and fell silent, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and something like jealousy. Maybe, she conceded after a moment, there's room for both approaches. Outside, the storm raged on, trapping them together in the small dwelling as evening approached. The storm intensified throughout the evening, transforming the desert landscape into an unfamiliar terrain of flowing water and mud. Inside Thomas's dwelling, they gathered around the wood stove, its warmth a welcome contrast to the tempestuous weather outside. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and the solar-powered lights flickered again, then died completely. Generator backup should kick in, Thomas said, moving to check the system. When nothing happened, he shrugged. Or not. He lit several oil lamps, their warm glow creating elongated shadows against the walls. The atmosphere shifted, becoming somehow more intimate in the softer light. It's like camping, Emma said with delight, clearly enjoying the adventure. Except drier, Lily added with a smile, pulling a blanket around her daughter's shoulders. Thomas retrieved emergency supplies, extra blankets, water, and a battery-powered radio that crackled with weather updates. The announcer's voice reported flash flood warnings throughout the region. We're on high enough ground, Thomas assured them, but the road will be washed out until tomorrow. Denise looked concerned. The car parts. Delayed, Thomas confirmed. As the evening progressed, they shared the simple meal Thomas prepared on the wood stove. The close quarters and exceptional circumstances created an unusual openness among them. Stories emerged naturally, safer ones at first, then gradually more revealing. Maria described growing up in New Mexico, the daughter of immigrants who worked multiple jobs to provide opportunities for their children. Denise spoke of her father's wrongful arrest and how it had shaped her passion for justice. Lily shared memories of performing music before giving it up for a more stable teaching career. The children drifted to sleep on Thomas's bed, while the adults continued talking, their voices low. What about you, Thomas? Lily asked during a lull in conversation. You mentioned nursing school, but what did you do after? Thomas was silent for so long they thought he might not answer. Military, he finally said. Army Scout. 2 tours. This unexpected revelation hung in the air. Vietnam? Denise asked quietly. Thomas nodded once. That must have been difficult, Maria said, especially as a Native American fighting for a country that took our land? Thomas finished wryly. Yes. Why did you enlist? Lily asked. Thomas rose and went to a small drawer beneath his bookshelf. He returned with a photograph, faded and creased from handling. In it, a much younger Thomas stood in uniform beside 3 other men, mountains visible in the background. Family tradition, he explained. Apache scouts worked with the Army since the 1860s. My father served. His father too. He pointed to one of the men in the photo. Jimmy Redhouse. We grew up together on the reservation. Died near Kisan. The women studied the photo with newfound understanding. Coming home was harder than going, Thomas continued unexpectedly. Reservation had changed. I had changed. That's when you met your wife? Lily guessed. A small smile crossed Thomas's face. Nancy was the nurse at the VA clinic. Stubborn woman. Wouldn't give up on me. She sounds wonderful, Maria said. She was, Thomas agreed simply. The conversation meandered as the storm continued its assault outside. Denise shared her frustrations with the healthcare system after Jacob's diagnosis. Maria revealed more about her husband's controlling behavior and her fears about his connections. Lily spoke of the loneliness of widowhood and her uncertainty about starting over. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Robert's memory by wanting to move on, she admitted. Like I'm erasing him by building a new life. The dead don't need our grief, Thomas said quietly. They need our living. These words settled over them, provoking thoughtful silence. As the night deepened, they prepared to sleep. The storm had passed its peak intensity but continued steadily. With the children occupying the bed, the adults arranged sleeping mats near the wood stove. Thomas checked the door one final time before extinguishing all but one lamp. As he settled onto his mat, he noticed Lily watching him. Your home feels different with people in it, she observed softly. Louder, Thomas replied, but without complaint. Fuller, Lily corrected with a smile. In the dim light, their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Thomas felt an unfamiliar sensation, something long dormant stirring to life again. The feeling was both welcome and terrifying. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, water already beginning its work of transformation across the desert. Coaxing dormant seeds to life, reshaping the land in subtle ways, creating new paths where none had existed before. Inside, a similar transformation was quietly taking place among 7 souls brought together by chance and circumstance. Morning arrived with startling clarity. The air washed clean, the sky an impossible blue. Thomas woke first as usual and slipped outside to assess the storm's aftermath. Water had carved new channels across his property, but the dwelling and outbuildings stood undamaged. He was testing the saturated ground near the disabled car when Lily joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. The others are still sleeping, she explained, offering him a steaming cup. They walked together toward the edge of Thomas's property where a small rise offered a view of the transformed landscape. Desert flowers that had been invisible yesterday now dotted the terrain with surprising color, tiny blooms seizing their brief opportunity after the rain. It's beautiful, Lily said, like the desert was hiding all this life, just waiting. Thomas nodded. Happens every monsoon season. Few days of color, then back to survival mode. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence before Lily spoke again. I need to check something in my car. Walk with me. Thomas followed her to the small sedan where she opened the trunk and retrieved a weathered leather satchel. From inside, she produced a thick stack of papers held together with binder clips. A manuscript, pages dog-eared and marked with colorful sticky notes. I've never shown this to anyone, she admitted. Not even Emma. Thomas waited patiently as Lily gathered her courage. "I always wanted to be a writer," she explained, "since I was a girl. But life happened: college, teaching, marriage, Emma." She touched the manuscript reverently. "I started this after Robert got sick. Late nights in hospital waiting rooms, stolen moments between caregiving." "A novel?" Thomas asked. Lily nodded. "Based partly on my grandmother's life. She came to America from Czechoslovakia during World War II. Lost everything. Started over." "Like you're doing now," Thomas observed. "I never thought of it that way. But yes." Lily looked down at the manuscript. "Robert never knew about it. I was afraid he'd think I was wasting time that should have been spent caring for him or Emma." "Was he that kind of man?" "No," Lily admitted. "That was my own fear. Robert was kind, supportive. But during his illness, everything became about survival. Just getting through each day." Thomas understood this completely. "And after, I couldn't seem to find my way back to normal life. This manuscript became, I don't know, proof that I existed apart from grief. That I still had thoughts and dreams of my own." She laughed self-consciously. "That sounds selfish." "Sounds human," Thomas corrected. They began walking back toward the house, their pace unhurried. "In Phoenix," Lily continued, "there's a small publishing house that specializes in historical fiction. They have an open submission period next month. Part of me wants to submit this, but another part is terrified." "Of rejection?" "Of acceptance," Lily clarified. "If they want it, then what? I'd have to believe in myself as something other than Robert's widow or Emma's mother." Thomas considered this. "When I came back from Vietnam, I couldn't remember who I was before. Took years to find that person again." "Did you find him?" "Parts," Thomas said. "Other parts were gone for good. Had to build something new with what remained." They paused beneath the shade of a mesquite tree. In the distance, they could see the others beginning to stir, Emma and Sophia on the porch looking out at the water-transformed landscape. "Emma asked if we could stay longer," Lily said suddenly. "After the car is fixed." Thomas's expression remained neutral, but his pulse quickened slightly. "What did you tell her?" "That it wasn't our home, that we were just passing through." Lily met his eyes directly. "But the truth is, I haven't felt this at peace since before Robert got sick." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "Your plans were California?" Thomas asked. "My sister lives in San Diego," Lily confirmed. "She's offered her guest room until we find a place. But nothing's finalized." Thomas nodded slowly, processing this information. After 20 years of solitude, the idea of anything else seemed both impossible and suddenly, unexpectedly appealing. "The desert isn't an easy place," he said finally. "Neither is starting over," Lily replied. Emma called from the porch, breaking the moment. "Mom, Jacob found a horned toad." Lily smiled. "I should go see this miracle." As she turned to leave, Thomas spoke again. "I'd like to read it sometime. Your manuscript." The surprise and pleasure that illuminated Lily's face made her look years younger. "I'd like that too." They walked back to join the others, maintaining a respectable distance between them, yet something had shifted. A door cracked open just enough to let in the possibility of change. By mid-morning, the ground had dried enough to venture beyond the immediate property. Thomas suggested a short hike to a nearby canyon where the flash flood would have created temporary waterfalls. "There's something special there," he told them, his typical reticence giving way to an unfamiliar enthusiasm. "If you're interested." The children immediately clamored to go, and the adults agreed that fresh air and movement would be welcome after being confined during the storm. "Nothing strenuous," Thomas assured Denise, who looked concerned about Jacob. "And we'll bring your medicine, just in case." They set out with water bottles and simple provisions. Thomas led them along a path only he could see, occasionally pointing out fresh animal tracks left after the rain. Within 30 minutes, they reached a narrow canyon where water still trickled down red rock walls. "It'll be dry again by tomorrow," Thomas explained. "Desert takes what it needs quickly, then the sun reclaims the rest." He guided them along the canyon floor until they reached a sheltered alcove in the rock face. There, protected from the elements by a natural overhang, was an extensive panel of ancient petroglyphs, images carved into the desert varnish of the rock surface. "Whoa!" Jacob breathed, eyes wide. "How old are these?" Denise asked, professional skepticism temporarily forgotten in the face of such ancient art. "Some over 1,000 years," Thomas replied. "Different peoples, different times. Hohokam, ancestral Puebloan, Apache." The petroglyphs depicted human figures, animals, spirals, and more abstract symbols. Some were deeply carved and clear, others faded with time. "Can you read them?" Emma asked Thomas, her voice hushed with awe. "Not like a book," Thomas explained, "but they tell stories. This group here," he pointed to a series of figures holding hands, "represents community, and these spirals mean water, precious in the desert." Sophia approached one section that showed a human figure appearing to transform into a bird. "What about this one?" "Transformation story," Thomas said. "Common in many traditions. The boundary between human and animal, physical and spiritual, isn't as fixed as we think." The children moved along the wall, discovering new images with excited whispers, while the adults took in the broader significance of the place. "It's humbling," Lily remarked. "Our problems seem so immediate and important, but standing here—" "Perspective," Thomas agreed. Maria studied a series of handprints pressed into the ancient mud that had hardened to stone. "Someone stood right here, 1,000 years ago, and left their mark. Saying I exist," Denise added thoughtfully. Thomas led them to a flat area beneath the petroglyphs where they could rest and eat. The canyon provided shade from the intensifying day, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth and desert vegetation. "In Apache tradition," Thomas said as they settled, "places like this are sacred, not just because of the art, but because the boundary between worlds is thinner here." "What worlds?" Jacob asked, munching an apple. "Physical and spiritual," Thomas explained. "Past and present." He reached into his pocket and produced a small pouch of finely ground materials. With careful movements, he created a simple design on a flat stone, a circle with radiating lines. "A blessing symbol," he told them, "for protection and guidance." The children watched with fascination as Thomas performed a brief ceremony, speaking softly in Apache. Though they couldn't understand the words, the reverence in his voice transcended language. "What did you say?" Emma whispered when he finished. "I thanked the ancestors for watching over this place," Thomas translated, "and asked for their blessing on our journey forward." "All of us?" Sophia asked, her usual wariness momentarily suspended. Thomas nodded. "All of us." As they prepared to leave, each person lingered before the ancient art, connecting in their own way with the human experience that spanned centuries. Lily traced a spiral with her finger, not touching the rock but following its path in the air. Denise examined the craftsmanship with newfound respect. Maria stood before the transformation figure, her expression suggesting deep personal recognition. On the return journey, they walked in contemplative silence for a while before the children's natural exuberance reasserted itself. Sophia walked beside Thomas, unusually talkative as she asked questions about the petroglyphs and their meanings. "Could I learn to make those?" she asked. "The old way used stone tools," Thomas explained, "but there are modern ways to practice the designs. Would you show me?" The simple request, and the trust it implied, caught Thomas by surprise. "Yes," he said after a moment, "I could do that." As they crested the final rise before his property came into view, Thomas paused. From this vantage point, his solitary dwelling looked different. More like a home with the vehicles parked nearby, clothing hung to dry on an improvised line, children's footprints marking paths in the sandy soil. For the first time in 20 years, the sight didn't reinforce his isolation, but instead suggested unexpected possibilities. They returned from the hike in good spirits, the shared experience having deepened their connections. Thomas began preparations for the evening meal while the others settled into what had become familiar routines in his small home. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew everyone's attention. Through the window, they saw a tribal police SUV navigating the still muddy access road, its official markings visible even at a distance. Maria froze, her hand instinctively reaching for Sophia. "How did he find us?" she whispered, fear tightening her voice. Thomas moved to the door. "Stay inside," he instructed calmly. "Let me handle this." He stepped onto the porch as the SUV parked. A tall Apache man in uniform emerged, adjusting his hat against the afternoon sun. His badge caught the light, tribal police, just as Thomas had recognized from the vehicle. "Officer Begay." Thomas greeted him with a nod. "Thomas." The officer returned with familiar ease. "Been a while." They had history. Officer Joe Begay had been several years behind Thomas in school but had looked up to him. After Thomas's withdrawal from community life, Joe occasionally checked on him during his patrols, respecting Thomas's desire for solitude while maintaining the minimal connection. "What brings you out this way?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer. Joe shifted his weight. "Unusual to see so many vehicles at your place. Thought I'd check everything was all right." Thomas knew better. "Just some travelers with car trouble. Should be moving on tomorrow." Joe nodded slowly, his expression professional but not unfriendly. "One of those travelers wouldn't happen to be a Maria Velasquez, would she? With her daughter?" Inside, Maria heard her name and clutched Sophia tighter. Lily moved beside them in silent support while Denise positioned herself protectively near the children. Thomas kept his face neutral. "Why do you ask?" Joe sighed, lowering his voice. "Got an alert from New Mexico. Missing persons report filed by her husband. Says she took their daughter without permission. Violated custody agreement." "That so?" Thomas's tone revealed nothing. According to the report, Joe confirmed, studying Thomas's reaction. "Husband's got connections. Reports being taken seriously." Thomas considered his options carefully. Joe was a good man, but he was also an officer with responsibilities. "You want to come inside?" he finally asked. After a moment's hesitation, Joe nodded. "Might be best." Thomas led him into the dwelling where the atmosphere had grown tense. Maria stood with her arm around Sophia, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "Ma'am," Joe acknowledged her respectfully, "I believe you know why I'm here." Before Maria could respond, Denise stepped forward. "Officer, I'm Denise Washington. I was an attorney in New Mexico before relocating. Are you here with a warrant or simply making inquiries?" Joe's eyebrows raised slightly at the unexpected legal challenge. "No warrant, just following up on an alert." "Then this is merely an informal conversation," Denise stated confidently. "And Ms. Velasquez is under no obligation to leave with you or answer questions without representation." Joe turned his attention to Maria. "Your husband claims you violated a custody agreement." "There is no custody agreement," Maria replied, finding her voice. "We're still legally married. I have every right to travel with my daughter." Thomas watched the exchange silently, noting Sophia's widening eyes and trembling hands. The girl was reliving something. Her rigid posture spoke of past trauma. "Ricardo has friends in the police department," Maria continued. "He's using them to find us because—" She faltered, unwilling to say more in front of Sophia. Thomas moved to stand beside Maria. "Joe, I've known you since you were a boy. Your father and I served together. You know I wouldn't harbor someone if I thought they were in the wrong. Joe's official demeanor softened slightly. I know that, Thomas. Maria and Sophia are here under my protection, Thomas continued, as guests of an Apache elder on reservation-adjacent land. The invocation of traditional protection carried weight with Joe, who had deep respect for tribal customs despite his modern role. Sophia suddenly spoke, her voice small but determined. He hits her. I saw it. That's why we left. The room fell silent. Maria closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features, not at the revelation but at her daughter's burden of witnessing it. Joe's expression shifted. Ms. Velasquez, has your husband physically harmed you? Maria nodded slowly. Yes, many times. I have documentation with a lawyer in Albuquerque. And photographs, Denise added. Medical records, too. Joe removed his hat, his official purpose now complicated by this information. That changes things. Domestic violence supersedes most custody claims. He'll come looking, Maria warned. He won't stop. I understand, Joe said. He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. My direct number, if you need assistance while you're in our jurisdiction. The gesture was significant. Unofficial support from an officer who recognized the reality beyond the formal report. Thank you, Maria whispered, taking the card. As Joe prepared to leave, he paused beside Thomas. You've gotten yourself involved in something complicated, old friend. Thomas nodded once. Wouldn't be the first time. Joe replaced his hat and turned to go, but not before adding quietly, watch the northern road. If he comes, that's the way he'll approach. After Officer Begay's departure, a palpable tension lingered in the small dwelling. Maria sat with Sophia on the porch, whispering reassurances while the others maintained a respectful distance. Thomas watched from the doorway, recognizing the fragile moment between mother and daughter. Truths finally spoken aloud, changing their relationship forever. As evening approached, Thomas suggested a fire outside rather than remaining confined indoors. Night will be clear after the storm, he explained. Good for thinking. They gathered around the fire pit as stars emerged in the darkening sky. The flames cast flickering light on their faces, creating a space that felt both intimate and ancient. Thomas remained silent longer than usual, then rose and entered his home. When he returned, he carried a single eagle feather, its shaft wrapped in red cloth. In Apache tradition, he said, settling back into his place, we sometimes hold a talking circle when decisions must be made or hearts need unburdening. He placed the feather carefully on his palm. Whoever holds this speaks their truth. Others listen without judgment or interruption. When finished, they pass the feather to another. The children straightened with interest at this ritual introduction. Do we have to? Jacob asked anxiously. No one has to, Thomas assured him. Circle is always voluntary. Denise looked skeptical but didn't object. Lily watched Thomas with quiet admiration, while Maria seemed lost in thought, her arm still protectively around Sophia. I'll begin, Thomas said, surprising them all. He rarely initiated personal conversation. He held the feather thoughtfully. For 20 years, I've lived alone. Told myself it was better that way. Safer. His weathered face reflected the firelight. Now I'm not so sure. The simple admission hung in the air, powerful in its vulnerability from such a stoic man. My fear, he continued, is that I've forgotten how to live with others. That solitude has changed me too much. He paused. My hope is that it's not too late to remember. Thomas looked around the circle, then extended the feather toward Sophia. Would you like to speak next? The girl hesitated, then reached for the feather with solemn dignity. I'm afraid all the time, she confessed, her voice small but steady. Afraid of my father finding us. Afraid of my mother getting hurt again. Afraid of always running. Maria's eyes glistened in the firelight, but she remained silent, honoring the talking circle's rules. But, Sophia continued with unexpected strength, I hope someday we can stop being afraid, stop looking over our shoulders. I hope we find somewhere to belong. She passed the feather to Jacob, who accepted it with wide eyes. I'm afraid of being sick forever, he said simply, and that my mom will always have to take care of me instead of doing what she loves. He twisted the feather in his small hands. I hope I get better so she can be a lawyer again and help people. Denise brushed away tears as Jacob passed the feather to Emma. I'm afraid of forgetting my dad, Emma admitted. His voice is already harder to remember. She looked at Lily apologetically. And I'm afraid if Mom finds someone new, it means Dad wasn't enough. Lily's breath caught audibly, but she maintained the circle's discipline. I hope, Emma continued, we can be happy again without feeling guilty about it. The feather passed to Maria, who held it with trembling fingers. I'm afraid of what my choices have done to Sophia, she said, for staying too long, for what she witnessed, for uprooting her life. Her voice strengthened. My hope is to give her a childhood without fear, and to find my own strength again. When the feather reached Denise, she hesitated before accepting it. I'm afraid I've lost myself in being Jacob's mother and caretaker, she confessed. That the woman who once fought for justice has disappeared. She looked at her son with fierce love. And I hope to find balance, to care for him without sacrificing everything else I am. Finally, the feather came to Lily. I'm afraid of disappearing, she said softly, of being only Robert's widow or Emma's mother for the rest of my life. She turned the feather gently. I hope to find my voice again, in writing, in music, in living. As the feather returned to Thomas, he placed it on a small stone near the fire. In our tradition, he explained, what is spoken in the circle stays within the circle, but its power remains with us. They sat in contemplative silence, the shared vulnerabilities creating a bond stronger than their brief acquaintance would suggest. The desert night embraced them, vast and ancient, while their small fire held back the darkness. Tomorrow, Thomas said finally, the car parts should arrive. You'll need to decide what comes next. No one responded immediately, each lost in thought about paths forward and possibilities not considered before this unexpected detour in the Arizona desert. Morning brought the promised delivery, a tribal maintenance truck negotiating the still muddy road to deliver the radiator hose and coolant for Maria's car. Thomas and Denise, who surprised everyone with her mechanical knowledge, set to work on the repairs. Inside, Lily spread a road map across Thomas's table. The children clustered around, tracing potential routes with their fingers while Maria looked on, her expression thoughtful. Phoenix is about 3 hours from here on good roads, Lily said, her finger following the highway. Then San Diego is another 5 or 6 beyond that. Sophia frowned at the map. That's still a lot of driving. We could break it up, Maria suggested. Stay in Phoenix a few days before continuing west. Emma looked up from the map. Do we have to go right away? I like it here. The innocent question hung in the air, touching on the unspoken thoughts many of them had harbored since the talking circle. Lily smoothed the map absently. We don't want to overstay our welcome, sweetheart. But what if? Emma began, then stopped as Thomas and Denise entered, wiping grease from their hands. Car's fixed, Denise announced. Good to go whenever we're ready. A strange silence fell over the group. What had been a clear plan before their unexpected detour now seemed less certain. Their brief time in Thomas's home had affected each of them differently, but profoundly. Thomas sensed the hesitation. No rush, he said, surprising himself. Roads are still drying out. Safer to wait another day. Relief crossed several faces at this temporary reprieve from decision. Later, Thomas found Lily alone on the porch, staring at the distant mountains. He settled beside her on the bench. Emma doesn't want to leave, Lily said without preamble. Thomas nodded. Children adapt quickly to new places. It's not just Emma, Lily admitted, turning to face him. I've been thinking about what happens after San Diego. My sister's place is temporary. I'd need to find work, a place to live, schools for Emma. Practical concerns, Thomas acknowledged. Yes, but also, Lily hesitated. I felt something shift during our talking circle, like I've been holding my breath for 2 years, and suddenly remembered I could exhale. Thomas understood completely. Desert has that effect sometimes. Is it just the desert? Lily asked softly. Before Thomas could respond, Maria approached with her own dilemma. Officer Begay called, she explained. Ricardo has expanded the search. He's hired private investigators to supplement the police alerts. That complicates your journey, Thomas observed. Maria nodded grimly. Every stop is a risk. Every interaction with authorities, every credit card transaction, every school enrollment for Sophia. What about staying here? Lily suggested suddenly. Just until things cool down? Maria looked surprised. Here? But Thomas has more space than he uses, Lily finished. And we'd contribute, of course. They both turned to Thomas, whose expression remained unreadable. 20 years of solitude weighed against 3 days of unexpected companionship, an unbalanced equation by any measure. Yet something had awakened in him that he'd thought long dead. There's the cabin, he said finally. Cabin? Maria asked. Thomas pointed toward a rise behind his dwelling. 1/4 mile that way, my grandfather's old place. Needs work, but has good bones. This revelation surprised them both. Thomas had never mentioned another structure on his property. Could it be made livable? Lily asked. With effort, Thomas confirmed. Has 2 rooms. Water hookup still works. The conversation paused as Denise joined them, having overheard from the doorway. I may have another complication, she announced. I just got a call from Phoenix Children's Hospital. They can take Jacob for their clinical trial, but we need to be there next week for preliminary tests. That's wonderful news, Lily said. It is, Denise agreed. But it means we'd need to stay in the Phoenix area for at least 6 months. The housing near the hospital is expensive, and I'd need to find work immediately. Thomas considered this new information. Reservation Clinic in White River is looking for administrative help. 30 miles from here. They value medical background. Denise's eyebrows rose. Are you suggesting? 45-minute drive to Phoenix. Thomas continued matter-of-factly. Doable for regular appointments. The 3 women exchanged looks, a new possibility taking shape that none had considered before. We should talk to the children, Maria said finally. They gathered everyone inside where the road map still lay open on the table. Beside it, Thomas placed a smaller, more detailed map of the local area, with his property clearly marked. We have decisions to make, he told them. All of us. As the afternoon progressed, they discussed options, practical concerns, and arrangements. The children's excitement at the possibility of staying grew, while the adults weighed logistical challenges against intuitive certainty. By evening, the road map had been folded away, replaced by a sketch Thomas had made of his property, with notes about potential improvements and expansions. The future, which had seemed so predetermined just days ago, now opened into unexpected possibilities. The following morning, Thomas led them to his grandfather's cabin. The path wound through mesquite trees and around boulder formations, climbing gently until they reached a small plateau. There, nestled against a natural rock wall that provided shelter from northern winds, stood the structure. Time and desert elements had taken their toll. The wooden porch sagged in places, several window panes were cracked or missing, and the roof needed attention. Yet, as Thomas had said, the bones were good sturdy log construction with stone foundations, built to withstand desert extremes. Thomas produced a key from his pocket, working it in the stiff lock until the door swung open with a protesting creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that penetrated the windows. The main room was spacious by cabin standards, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A doorway led to a smaller second room. "My grandfather built this in the 1930s, Thomas explained. "Lived here until he passed in '88. "It's perfect," Emma declared immediately, already claiming the space in her imagination. The adults were more measured in their assessment, noting the work required: cleaning, repairs, furnishings. Denise tested the water pump outside, surprised when it produced a stream after minimal priming. "Solar panels could work here," Thomas observed, pointing to the south-facing roof. "Like at my place." They returned to Thomas's dwelling, where he retrieved a large sheet of paper and pencils. At his kitchen table, he began sketching a blueprint of potential renovations to the cabin. "2 bedrooms here," he indicated, extending the smaller room. "Shared living space. Simple kitchen along this wall." Lily studied the drawings with growing excitement. This could really work. "With effort," Thomas cautioned. "And materials." "I have savings," Denise offered. "Not much, but enough to contribute." "Me too," Lily added. "And I could look for teaching positions in the area." Maria seemed hesitant. "I don't have much money. Ricardo controlled our finances." "You have other skills," Thomas noted. "Saw you fixing that broken chair yesterday. Good with your hands." The planning continued throughout the day. Thomas contacted Sam at the trading post, who agreed to order initial supplies. Denise called the reservation clinic and scheduled an interview for the following week. Lily researched nearby schools on her laptop, discovering that the reservation school was small but well-regarded. "They need a music teacher," she announced, her expression brightening. "Part-time, but it's something." For Maria, the cabin offered something more valuable than opportunity: obscurity. Located away from main roads, accessible only by the private drive through Thomas's property, it provided a hiding place from Ricardo's searching. "Officer Begay thinks it's a good plan," she told the others after a phone call. "He says my location won't appear in any official records if I'm staying on reservation-adjacent land." By afternoon, they had created a comprehensive blueprint and work schedule. The initial renovations would take approximately 2 weeks, making the cabin minimally habitable. Further improvements would follow as time and resources allowed. "We'll need beds, a refrigerator, stove." Denise began listing essentials. "Reservation has a reuse center," Thomas suggested. "Good furniture, donated appliances." Sophia, who had been quietly observing the adults' planning, suddenly spoke. "Where will you live, Thomas?" The question silenced the room. They had been so focused on the cabin arrangements that this fundamental point remained unaddressed. "My place," Thomas answered simply. "Where I've always been." "But you'll be alone again," Sophia pressed, showing unusual boldness. Thomas glanced at Lily, a look not lost on the perceptive Sophia. "I'll be nearby," he said. "Not the same as before." That evening, Thomas walked alone to the ridge above his property. From this vantage point, he could see both his dwelling and the cabin site. For 20 years, he had valued his isolation, structured his life around solitude. Now, in the span of a few days, everything was changing. He removed the river stone from his medicine bundle, rolling it between his fingers as he contemplated the transformation unfolding. Nancy would have approved, he thought. She had always told him he wasn't meant for loneliness. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert, Thomas made his way back down the ridge. At the cabin site, he paused, noticing something he'd missed during their tour. Near the back corner, barely visible beneath years of accumulated sand, the small handprints of a child pressed into the concrete foundation. Michael's prints, made when Thomas's grandfather had added the back portion decades ago. Thomas knelt and gently brushed away the sand, revealing the small impressions completely. His son's presence, preserved in concrete, seemed to offer a blessing for the new life preparing to fill this space. 2 weeks of concentrated effort transformed the cabin. New windows gleamed in old frames, the porch stood solid again, and the roof no longer threatened to admit desert storms. Inside, donated furniture created a comfortable if mismatched living space. The women had added personal touches, curtains sewn from fabric found at the trading post, children's drawings tacked to walls, a bookshelf Thomas had crafted from reclaimed wood. Word had spread through the small reservation community about Thomas Nighthawk's unexpected guests. Curiosity brought visitors, first Sam from the trading post with his wife, then a few tribal elders who had known Thomas for decades. They arrived with housewarming gifts, handwoven blankets, pottery, practical items for desert living. Thomas, to everyone's surprise including his own, didn't retreat from these social interactions. He introduced his guests with quiet dignity, explaining their circumstances in general terms that preserved privacy while establishing their legitimacy in the community's eyes. On the evening before Denise and Jacob would make their first trip to Phoenix for medical appointments, Thomas approached the group with unusual formality. In Apache tradition, he began, when new family is formed, not by blood but by choice, a blessing ceremony acknowledges the bond. The others listened with interest. Would you participate in such a ceremony? Thomas asked. Tomorrow at sunrise. Like a housewarming? Lily asked. Deeper, Thomas explained. A recognition that you belong here now, that we've formed something new together. The women exchanged glances, moved by the significance of his offer. We would be honored, Maria spoke for them all. That night, Thomas stayed up late preparing. From a special trunk he hadn't opened in years, he retrieved ceremonial items. A beaded blessing basket passed through generations of Nighthawk healers. Sage bundles, sacred cornmeal, and a small drum. Before dawn, he walked to the cabin and built a fire in the clearing before the porch. As the first light touched the eastern horizon, the others emerged, having been instructed to wake early. They gathered around the fire, where Thomas had placed the blessing basket in a position of honor. The Apache believed that family transcends blood. Thomas began, his voice taking on a formal cadence they hadn't heard before. That true kinship comes from shared struggle, mutual protection, and joined paths. He lifted the blessing basket, woven in intricate patterns of black and white. This basket has witnessed 5 generations of Nighthawk family ceremonies, he explained. Today it welcomes you. Thomas instructed each person to place something meaningful into the basket, a symbol of what they brought to their new community. Maria contributed a small smooth stone from her hometown river. Denise added a braided strand of Jacob's hair from his first haircut. Lily placed a pressed flower from Robert's funeral program. The children contributed treasured small objects. Emma's lucky marble, Jacob's favorite toy car, Sophia's hair ribbon. Finally, Thomas added an eagle feather, the same one they had used in their talking circle. Tribal elders arrived as the ceremony continued, standing respectfully at the periphery. Officer Begay came too, out of uniform but present as a community member and friend. Thomas lit the sage bundle, allowing its purifying smoke to drift over each person as he spoke Apache blessings. Though they couldn't understand the words, the reverence in his voice transcended language. When he finished, Thomas handed the drum to the eldest tribal visitor, who began a steady heartbeat rhythm. Thomas led the group in a simple dance around the fire, 3 circles symbolizing past, present, and future bound together. As the dance concluded, Thomas lifted the blessing basket high. What is placed in this basket remains connected, he declared. As these objects rest together, so do our lives now join. Not as strangers, not as temporary guests, but as family chosen by circumstance and affirmed by choice. He placed the basket on the cabin's new mantle, its position of honor signifying its importance. The elders came forward then, greeting each woman and child with traditional Apache welcomes. One elderly woman, known as a keeper of traditions, placed her hands on Sophia's shoulders. "You have strong spirit," she told the girl. Like a young deer, watchful but swift. Sophia's eyes widened at being seen so clearly by a stranger. The gathering evolved into an impromptu celebration. Community members brought food, sharing a meal that bridged cultural differences. Children played together, language barriers falling away in the universal communications of childhood. Thomas stood slightly apart, watching the scene with complex emotions. Lily approached, standing beside him in comfortable silence before speaking. "Thank you," she said simply, "for the ceremony, for everything." Thomas nodded, words temporarily beyond him. 20 years of isolation had not prepared him for the fullness he now felt watching his home, his land, filled with new life. "It suits you," Lily observed, "having family around you again." Thomas considered this. "It does," he admitted, surprising himself with the realization. As Lily's hand found his, Thomas didn't pull away. Instead, his weathered fingers gently closed around hers, completing a circle that had begun with corn roasting over an open fire and unexpected headlights in the desert night. 6 months later, the desert prepared for another monsoon season. The landscape had transformed since the previous year, not just in the natural cycle of desert life, but in the human presence that now populated Thomas's once solitary domain. The cabin had evolved beyond basic habitability into a true home. A covered walkway now connected it to a new structure, a modest workshop where Maria restored furniture found at the reservation reuse center, creating pieces she sold at the trading post and local markets. Her skilled hands had found purpose in transformation, taking discarded items and giving them new life and beauty. Solar panels gleamed on both roofs, providing reliable power. A small garden flourished in the protected area behind the cabin, where Sophia tended desert-adapted vegetables with growing expertise under Thomas's guidance. Thomas's own dwelling had changed too. The spare, functional space now held evidence of regular visitors. A comfortable reading chair where Lily often sat in the evenings, children's drawings pinned to walls, additional dishes in the cabinet. The phonograph played regularly, sometimes with Nancy's old records, sometimes with new ones Lily had found. This particular evening they gathered outside around the fire pit where their journey had begun. Jacob, his face fuller and healthier than 6 months prior, helped Thomas place ears of corn on the cooking grate, the same one that had been there the night 3 sets of headlights had appeared on the horizon. "The clinical trial is working," Denise announced, having just returned from their bi-weekly trip to Phoenix. "His blood work shows significant improvement." Collective joy greeted this news. Jacob's health had been their shared concern. His treatments a community effort with driving responsibilities rotated among the adults. "The doctor said I might be able to play soccer next season," Jacob added excitedly. "That calls for celebration," Lily declared, retrieving her guitar from inside. The instrument, a birthday gift from Thomas, had reawakened her musical talents. Her fingers, hesitant at first, now moved confidently across the strings as she played. Sophia and Emma returned from collecting kindling, their initial wariness of each other long transformed into sisterly companionship. Sophia's vigilant demeanor had softened over the months, though she still occasionally startled at unexpected sounds. Some wounds healed more slowly than others. As twilight deepened, Maria raised her glass. "I have news too," she said. "The divorce is final." Ricardo signed the papers. This announcement carried enormous weight. Officer Begay's connections and Denise's legal knowledge had helped navigate the complex process, but the successful conclusion still seemed miraculous. "He's agreed to supervised visitation only," Maria continued, "and the restraining order is permanent." "You're free," Thomas observed quietly. Maria nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We both are," she said, glancing at Sophia, who now moved through the world with growing confidence. As they shared the meal, conversation flowed easily. Denise's recent cases at the legal aid clinic where she volunteered, Lily's music students at the reservation school, Maria's commissioned furniture pieces. The children contributed stories from their homeschool cooperative, where Thomas occasionally taught traditional skills and desert knowledge. After dinner, as the fire burned low and stars filled the desert sky, Thomas retreated briefly to his dwelling. He returned carrying something carefully wrapped in soft cloth. 6 months ago, he said, 3 cars arrived carrying strangers. He unwrapped the object, a framed photograph. Not the old family picture he had kept hidden for 20 years, but a new one taken at the blessing ceremony. All 7 of them stood before the cabin, their expressions reflecting the unlikely bond they had formed. Now, Thomas continued, his typical reticence giving way to careful words, no strangers remain. He passed the photograph to Lily, who sat beside him. Their relationship had developed slowly, respectfully. 2 people who understood loss finding unexpected joy in new beginnings. Her hand rested comfortably against his as they shared the photograph with the others. Distance still existed between Thomas's dwelling and the cabin, preserving some solitude for a man who had lived alone for 2 decades. But paths had been worn between the structures, visible evidence of constant movement back and forth, of lives intertwined by choice rather than blood. As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself repeating the ritual that had defined his days for 20 years. Tending fire, roasting corn, watching desert darkness claim the land. But now, where silence had once been his only companion, conversation and laughter surrounded him. Where emptiness had dwelled, fullness flourished. The desert remained unchanged in its essential nature, harsh, beautiful, demanding respect from those who dwelled within it. Yet for Thomas Nighthawk, everything had transformed. The healing he had sought in isolation had ultimately found him through connection. Later, as embers cooled and the others returned to their respective dwellings, Thomas lingered by the fire. Above him, stars wheeled in familiar patterns, the same stars that had witnessed his solitude for so many years. They now observed a different man, one who had opened the door when unexpected visitors knocked, and in doing so had finally found his way home.